So welcome to the second part of Halfdan the Black saga, and today I'll be reading about Halfdan the Black's strife with King Gandalf of Alfheim, or Ranarike's sons, and also be reading about his marriage to his second wife, also called Ragnhild. His first wife was called Ragnhild as well. The daughter of Sigurd Hjort, and their troubles with Hake, the berserker of Hadeland. So yeah, let's get into it. Strife between Halfdan and the Gandalfssons. Halfdan traveled to Vingulmark in the autumn. There was one night while Halfdan was traveling on visit that the man who sat to guard the horses came to him at midnight and said an army was approaching the farm. The king immediately stood up and asked his men to arm up, and they went out and fylked immediately. And I'm not translating. Fylking is another word that is used so much that I think it's quite nice to keep it. Also, it's a simple word. Instead of, I guess you could say, go into formation, which in battle terms is what it means, but fylke is also a wider word. As I mentioned before, you can say fylke is a unit within an organized hierarchy. So for example, under a region that is a kingdom, you have the fylkes, which I guess would be equivalent to states in the US, for example. And they went out and fylked immediately. Soon they caught sight of Gandalfssons Hysing and Helsing with a great army, and there was a ferocious battle. As King Halfdan was greatly outnumbered, he retreated into the forest and lost many men. There fell Olve the Wise, his foster father. After this, many men came to King Halfdan, and he went out searching for Gandalf's sons, and they found them at Eid at Øyern, and held battle with them there. There fell Hysing and Helsing, and their brother Hake fled. After that, King Halfdan conquered all of Vingulmark, while Hake fled to Alfheim. So now Halfdan expands, conquering Vingulmark, and Hake flees down to Alfheim, which is also called Ranarike. So Halfdan, he now has all the areas around the northern part of the Oslo fjord, going down, all the areas on the east coast, going all the way down to Agder, South Norway, southern tip, and on the west coast, and on the east coast he now has control, going up to Oslo and down to what is today Fredrikstad, where the river Glomma comes out. South of that, going along the coast and inland, you have Alfheim, also Ranarike, and this is where Hake fled. Halfdan's later marriage, where he married Ragnhild, daughter of Sigurd Hjort. Sigurd Hjort was the name of the king of Ringerike. He was larger and stronger than all other men, and of all men he was the most handsome to look upon. So Ringerike is the areas, if you go west of the Oslo fjord into the Tyri fjord and Steinsfjord, and going up, not all the way to the Randsfjord, but between like Hønefoss and what is today the city is called Hønefoss and Jevnaker. That would be like the area between there would be the border between Hadeland and Ringerike. And Ringerike goes west into the lower parts of Hallingdal, and yeah, so forth. And in the Steinsfjord is the estate or farm of Stein, which was a king's seat, and quite likely Sigurd Hjort, his seat. His father was Helge the Sharp, and his mother was Åslaug, the daughter of Sigurd Snake in Eye, the son of Ragnar Lodbrok. Now, these are famous names in Norse sagas. Sigurd Hjort is mentioned in other sagas as one of Ragnar Lodbrok's great descendants. So he was also in himself an important person in the sagas. It is said that when he was 12 winters old, he killed Hildebrand the Berserker in a duel, and 11 more men with him. He accomplished many manly feats, and there's a long saga about him. He had 2 children. His daughter was called Ragnhild. She was the most capable of women, and she was in her 20s at that time. And Guttorm, her brother, who was still a boy. And that is said about Sigurd's death, that he rode alone out into the wildlands, as he was used to, where he hunted great animals and predators. And he was often out doing this. But when he had ridden far, he came to a clearing close to Hadeland, and there came against him Hake Berserk and 30 men. They fought there, and Sigurd Hjort fell, and 12 of Hake's men, and he himself lost his hand and received 3 other wounds. After that, Hake rode with his men to Sigurd's house, and kidnapped his daughter Ragnhild and Guttorm her brother, and took off and brought with him many valuables and treasures, and returned home to Hadeland. He had a large farm there. He then set up for guests and started preparations for a wedding with Ragnhild. But he had to wait, as his wounds were not healing well. Hake Hadelands-berserkers lay with wounds the whole autumn and the first part of the winter too. Come Christmas, and King Halfdan was in Hedmark. He had heard news of all of this. There was an early morning, and the king was in his clothes. He called Hárek Sorcerer to him and told him to travel to Hadeland and lead Ragnhild, the daughter of Sigurd Hjort, home. Hárek readied himself and had 100 men, and set the course so they came over the lake to Hake's farm just before sunrise, and set men at all the doors of the house where the housecarls slept. Then they went to Hake's sleeping house, forced it open, and quickly took Ragnhild and Guttorm, her brother, and all the valuables that were therein, before they burned down the house with the housecarls and all the men that were therein. They hitched horses to a large wagon, and placed Ragnhild and Guttorm in it, and started down towards the ice. Hake stood up and chased them for a while, but when he came to the ice-covered waters, he flipped his sword around the hilt on the ground and lay down on the blade, so the sword went straight through him. That was his bane, and he is mounded at the lake hills. King Halfdan was watching when they came over the ice on the lake. He was a discerning man, and when he saw the hitched wagon, it seemed to him that things had gone according to plan. He ordered his table set and sent men around to the villages and invited many men. And that day was held a great feast. And during this feast King Halfdan married Ragnhild, and she became a powerful queen. Ragnhild's mother was Torne, daughter of Harald, king of Jutland. She was also the sister of Torvid Dane's Pride, who was married to Gorm the Old, who ruled the Danish lands. Now, Torne and Torvi are often translated as, or modernized as Tyrne and Tyrva. Tyrva Dannebod. Bod means pride. In Snorre, they are called Torvi and Torne. And also on the Smaller of the yelling stones were the carved yelling stones, which were commissioned by Torvi or Tyrva's husband, Gorm the Old. There she is called Torvi. So I'm going with Snorre's terms here, even though usually they're called Tyrne and Tyrva, or Tyra. And through Klakk Harald, Ragnhild is related to Ivar Widefathom. He's one of Klakk Harald's forefathers. So here, by marrying Ragnhild, King Halfdan is really consolidating the potential claims his lineage can have, and he's marrying powerful families here. Through Ragnhild, he's marrying back into Ynglinga lineage with through the line of Klakk Harald up to Ivar Widefathom, and this is not through blood relation but through mogskap, through married relations. And then through Ragnhild, she and Sigurd Hjort, he's also a descendant of Ragnar Lodbrok. So these actions in this part are quite dramatic. So, first you have the murder of Sigurd Hjort at the hands of Hake Berserk while he's hunting, and then you have the revenge and retrieval of Ragnhild and Guttorm by Halfdan the Black's men from Hedmark going over to Hadeland. But the geography around here is a little bit confusing. If you use the modern understanding of Hadeland and Hedmark, it doesn't really add up, because when we know that we read in the saga that Halfdan, they have to, from where they are in Hedmark, they have to cross ice in the direction of Hadeland. And we read that Hake's farm is also by a lake in Hadeland. And it's large enough that they can make an escape on a wagon, probably a sledded wagon, over the ice. So Hake by foot has to give up after a while. So it's probably, so he can chase them okay over land, but on the lake they can really, it would seem from the saga, speed up. So not a small lake. And in Hadeland today the only candidate is Randsfjord, which is the main lake in Hadeland. And in Hedmark the only candidate is Mjøsa. Now, which makes sense with the saga of Mjøsa, because these are the rich areas around. I would think that Halfdan the Black is in one of the big estates around the Helgøya area, and crossing over Lake Mjøsa there. Now, if he was to cross over in the middle of winter, this is, and travel to Hadeland as we understand it today, that would mean he would first have to cross from the area around Hamar and Helgøya. He would have to cross 10 to 15 kilometers of ice. They would probably be using a sledded wagon, and there would be 100 men. Now it's a long, but it's a pretty easy trip, and it's common still today. People cross the ice like that. And but after that, if he was to travel all the way to Hadeland, they'd have about a 25-kilometer trek on the old King's Road from Kapp on the coast of Mjøsa in Toten down to what is called a fjord called Einafjord, a smaller fjord, which still is in the Toten areas. That trek is hard. In the winter, that's really hard, and especially with the wagon and the cold. And when they come to the Einafjord, they can again travel on ice for some kilometers until they come to the south end of the Einafjord. Then they would again travel on a King's Road over a forested mountain, cross over to Brandbu. Likely, that's where the main like crossing roads from Toten to Hadeland would be, or to Land would be at that time. They would come down to Brandbu. That's another 20-25 kilometer trek with loads of height meters, like hundreds of height meters going up and going down. Another very tough trek. And then of course they would have about 20 kilometers on the ice in Randsfjorden until they would come to a likely candidate area for Hake's farm. So all in all, we're talking about 80-90 kilometer trek in the middle of winter with 100 men and a wagon. And from this type of terrain, I would say it's a 3-day forced march at best in summer, longer in winter. And also a dangerous trek, depending on the weather. You can be unlucky when you're in the mountains and, you know, get wind and snowfall and all this. That's a hefty trek. And from the saga, when we read it, it seems like Hárek Sorcerer, he's kind of sets a course that is quite direct, and they're gonna come there in the early hours before sunrise. It doesn't sound like he's planning week long trek or hike. So something's off with that. And it kind of, if you look at the maps I've linked to in the description, it will start making more sense, because Hadeland in the old days, before it was standardized in modern times, it was a greater region. It encompassed also not only what is today known as Hadeland, which is south and southwest of Toten and Land. It also could encompass Land and Toten. And then things start to make sense, because then Toten goes all the way up to Kapp and Lena, south of Gjøvik, on the west coast of Lake Mjøsa. And actually, local historians in Toten have suggested that their Håkenstad farm, which is old, and we know it's from before, both through its name, but also from sources that it's from before the Black Death, because after the Black Death it was probably, they died probably, the families there, because it was incorporated into Hof church's estates, which is the main church close to there, which is called Hof, which means it was a pagan church before it was a Christian church. Anyway, so Håkenstad also has finds of grave mounds and Viking swords. So it's and there are local stories about Hake Berserk. And then all the things with Halfdan the Black saga start clicking into place. Then Halfdan the Black it makes sense for him to travel to Hedmark to plan the revenge. Because if he was going to the modern day Hadeland, far away to the southwest, it would be much smarter for him to just go to Stein farm in Ringerike, where Sigurd Hjort had his seat, which is only a few kilometers away, and go up from there. Instead, he chooses to go to Hedmark, which means that Hake or Hake's estate is more over to the Mjøsa side. And then it also makes sense that Halfdan the Black is keeping an eye out on the ice, because this is the broadest area of Mjøsa, so he would see them traveling over the ice, and they would maybe just become a dot, and he would maybe lose them out of sight for a period while they're over doing their dirty work, but then quite quickly catch an eye of them again when they're coming back on the ice. So that would make sense, and it would make sense to go with a quite good force of men, 100 men, and it would make sense going with a wagon. The first times I read this, I didn't understand the wagon, because how are you going to cross all these mountain passes with a wagon? In the winter, it's just hard work. Well, of course you can do it. It's just a different type of action than a swift military operation. But if you're just crossing the ice of Mjøsa from coast to coast, then it makes complete sense, because with the sledded wagon they could quickly get up to speed and get Ragnhild and Guttorm safe out of there very fast. And Mjøsa is used like this all up. Even today it's very active in the winter on the ice. I can actually remember when I was growing up, in the weekends they would arrange fights on Mjøsa. So people from our village would get drunk and meet people from the village on the other side of the Mjøsa, and they would have dust-ups in the weekends. So maybe that tradition goes back to Viking times as well. Anyway, the things click into place then with Halfdan the Black saga, and what seemed like a far out scenario becomes a realistic scenario. And then we have Hake's suicide, which of course it doesn't seem like it comes out of the blue, but it's quite what happens to Hake is quite devastating. If he is really is at the farm in Kapp, this area, this is open country compared to so many other places. It's farm country. So Halfdan the Black's revenge, which is quite crushing. They don't simply come and take back Ragnhild and Guttorm, but they kill all his men, burn them in, and steal everything he has, devastates his farm. And this is open country out there, open farmland, so Hake Berserk, he's probably not called Hake Berserk for nothing, so he probably has a reputation. And then if he has a reputation, he has a reputation to maintain. And then Håkon, the Hárek Sorcerer, comes with his men, and quite publicly, all the farms in the local area would see this, reduces everything Hake has to dust, and without Hake leaving a dent in them. And already Hake he's been ill half a year, so I mean he would, when this happens and everything, his houses are burnt to the ground, he's humiliated that his coming wife is taken from him, and he's just left quite impotent there. So what's left for him would be only to die a reasonably honorable death. So he lies down on his blade. So that was Halfdan the Black saga. If you have any questions, you want to add anything or disagree with anything, please write a comment and I'll get back to you. If you enjoy the content, you can subscribe, and otherwise hope you join me for another video in the future.